So today we're going to talk about big books and I am so excited. We are going to talk about reading big books. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently because so far this year in 2021 I have read a few tomes, and last year 2020 I also read a few. I've heard a few people whose job it is to review books in some capacity talk against reading big books. And I can see where they are coming from in terms of how they organize their workload. You know, if you read books for a living, it would make sense to focus on smaller books so you can read more and have more to write or talk about. However, I'm not convinced by that kind of argument. Frankly, I think that's a cop-out. I think that you simply cannot ignore big books or prioritize short books to their detriment. I know I'm not a professional book critic, right? But I do have a channel where I talk about books, and I would never prioritize small books over big ones. In fact, size, or rather length, doesn't even figure among my list of criteria to read and review a book here. By the way, in case you are new to my channel, my name is Juan and I run Bookish Islander. You can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Bookish Islander, particularly if you would like to contact me about anything book related. And I am also on Goodreads. If you want to keep up with my reading, you can follow me on there. But here on YouTube, I post a new book every Saturday. Also, occasionally I make other kinds of book related content that get published on other days of the week. I'm still unsure if I could make this other kind of content a regular feature of my channel because making videos takes a lot more time than it probably seems. You know, even the simplest kind of video can take several hours between the time I come up with an idea until the actual video is ready to be published. If I make this a regular feature, I'll probably pick a day other than Saturday, of course, because I want Saturdays to be about book reviews to publish it. But if you subscribe and turn on the notifications bell, you will not miss out on anything I publish. But today I wanted to talk about big books. Why do I read big books? And more importantly, how do I read them? I know that some readers struggle to read big tomes, and I might be able to help them with some advice. At least sharing what works for me might inspire you to read more big books. That's my hope anyway. But I also want to hear from you, so please share your experience with big books in the comment section below if you like, so we can discuss it. Okay, I love big books, and the reason I love big books is purely and simply because I love reading. If you love reading, why wouldn't you love reading big books? To me, loving books is not about loving how many books you read. That approach to reading, where you want to read as many books as possible and you are willing to take all kinds of shortcuts to achieve that, always seems counterproductive. I'm not judging people who want to read as many books as possible. I want to read as many books as possible, and I want to spend as much time reading as I can because I love it. But for me, it is never about the number of books. It is about the books themselves. And just to be clear, I am not talking about any other kind of books other than fiction. I think other kinds of books, reading other kinds of books is a different activity. When I was a postgraduate student, for example, I read a lot. However, looking back on my Goodreads, it is clear that I was only able to read less than 10 books a year back then, and that is a lot less than I read today. I didn't consider my course reading, if that makes sense. For me, reading is what I do for pleasure. If I have to read a non-fiction book for work or study, then that's not reading to me. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else. So when I was a postgraduate student, I had to read lots of articles and essays, sometimes whole books, but mostly it was sections of books or articles published in journals. Of course, I also had to read novels, plays, and poetry, and I would include that as reading because I always derive pleasure from reading literature, even if I must read it for some other purpose, like doing a course, for example. All of this is to say that I do love reading big books as much as I love reading shorter books. But let's get into what I think you want to know, which is how do I tackle big books? And I have gathered a few big books here to use as examples because I do not have just one infallible method that I use to tackle tomes. I do admire people who are very systematic about their reading, those people who stick to a schedule, read a certain number of pages or spend a fixed amount of time reading each day. I'm not like that, at least not consistently all the time. I do go through phases, but I've recently realized that I almost approach each book differently, and in all modesty, I think that's the reason for my success, if you want to call it that. By success, I mean that I can read big, difficult books. By the way, some smaller or shorter books can take longer to read because they can be more complex. So do not make the mistake of assuming that all big books are hard and that all short books are easy. For example, I recently read The Trial by Franz Kafka, and I'm still trying to work out how I am going to talk about it on a video. Because as short as The Trial is, and it's no more than a novella, and Kafka left it unfinished, as you probably know, it is one of the most complex and layered books I have ever read. And I have read long novels that are a lot simpler and easier to read than The Trial. With The Trial, I had to take breaks often. I felt like I had to distance myself from the story every so often, just because the atmosphere of that novel is so oppressive that it can become almost unbearable. And you might find big books where you can get lost in them and have a great time and turn page after page and read them a lot quicker than something as oppressive as The Trial. Have you ever experienced what I'm talking about? I'm sure a lot of people have. What are the big books I've brought with me today? Let me begin with the ones I have been reading so far this year. So right now, at the time of making this video, I'm in the middle of rereading Anna Karenina, or Karenina. I love Tolstoy, so you can expect a review of Anna Karenina somewhat soon. Obviously, depending on when you're watching this video, my review of Anna Karenina may already be available. So, you know, check my book review playlist or go on my channel and take a look through my videos if you like. By the way, this is one of the weirdest things about posting videos here on YouTube. You might get a certain number of views on a video when you first publish it, but then some videos get a life of their own. And sometimes they get a lot of views months or even years after I publish them. So I never know when people are going to watch a particular video. And that means that some of the books I'm going to talk about in this video that I say I haven't read yet at the time of shooting, I might have read them and even reviewed them by the time you watch this, right? So you know what to do if you want to see if that is the case. Just go through my available videos or check out the playlist, my book review playlist. Anyway, I'm reading Anna Karenina for the second time. I remember racing through it when I first read it many years ago. I found it so engrossing that I just could not stop reading it. Also, back then, I used to read only one book at a time, so I'm pretty sure I finished Anna Karenina in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks max. This time, I'm taking my time. I'm paying a lot more attention to it. Also, I have been reading other books as I make my way through Anna Karenina. More on that in a second. And I guess I am a lot busier now than I used to be. Certainly I am busier than I was when I was younger and read Anna Karenina for the first time. So one of the things I do is read other shorter books in between chapters or sections. But I don't always do this. I tend to read other shorter books simultaneously with big books, mostly when I read classics, particularly 19th century classics. Let me explain this. Because of their structure, 19th century novels lend themselves very nicely to be read with other books. Why? Because originally these books, and this also applies to 18th century novels if I think about it, well, originally these books were published in several installments, usually over months, sometimes spanning more than a year, actually. So the first readers of books by the likes of Charles Dickens or George Eliot, I have Middlemarch here, had to wait between installments, and they probably read other stuff in the meantime. So when I read Middlemarch by George Eliot last year, which I have reviewed recently, so I'll link to it, I combined it with other shorter books. And I would love to say that I am always that consistent, but I am not. And at this point, I don't think I will change as a reader. So sometimes I make the mistake of combining 2 or more longer books. And that is something I'll confess I have done with Anna Karenina, because I have been combining it with not only one, but 2 other bricks. And one of them, and this is probably a bad call, is another 19th century novel. I've been reading the Portuguese classic novel The Maias, Os Maias, by Essa de Queiroz. But I realized that that wasn't a good idea. So as much as I was enjoying The Maias, and I really was, which by the way, may not look that big in this small cloth-bound edition by Tinta da China that I own, but that is because the print is tiny. Anyway, as much as I was enjoying this novel, I have decided to put it aside until I'm done with Anna Karenina. Otherwise, what would happen? I would run the risk of spending several weeks to come with the 2 novels and not finish either of them for a long time. And I feel like I need to move things along at this point. And that brings me to something else that I wanted to talk about. I don't know about you, but I love the feeling I get when I finish a book. I'm talking about that feeling of satisfaction and achievement that I'm sure most readers get when they finish a book, particularly a long book, probably. So whenever I haven't finished a book for several weeks, I start missing that feeling of accomplishment. And that is fine, you know, I don't think it's healthy to feel like that all the time. I don't want to be addicted to reading or to anything else for that matter. But the problem is that if I don't finish a book every so often, at least every 2 or 3 weeks, I start feeling demotivated. And that is counterproductive, because it usually means that I would spend less time reading and even possibly become uninterested in the books I am reading. So therefore, what will happen is that I would delay that feeling of accomplishment even more, right? So to break that vicious circle, or even stop it from happening, what I do is that whenever I feel like that is happening or about to happen, I would pick up a short story, a novella, or a play, something great, right? Because I don't want to waste my time with material that is less than great, but something that I can read in one sitting or as close to one sitting as possible. I do have other motivation tricks, like listening to people talk passionately about books here on YouTube or podcasts. But I think that's another issue, and one that I might explore in a future video, so I won't say more about it right now. Anyway, a moment ago, I talked about how I don't want to spend time reading anything that is less than great. And that brings me to the next big book I have here on my pile, and that is The Eighth Life by the Georgian-born German writer Nino Haratishvili, and I am probably butchering her name, so apologies to people watching this who can speak Georgian. Now, this is a contemporary novel. You might have heard about it, even read it. It is widely available in English translation. The copy I own is in Spanish, so the cover may not be familiar to most of you, but a lot of people have read this novel and talked about it here on YouTube, as a matter of fact. I'm going to put it down because it's very heavy. So I'm doing this novel as a buddy read with a dear friend who also watches my channel and often comments, but she doesn't have her own channel, so I can't link to anything. Anyway, we're both on the verge of bailing on The Eighth Life because it is a very conventional, run-of-the-mill story with very flat characters. It is true that it can be fun to read. I mean, it has a lot of plot, so there's a story you can follow, and it's not a bad story. It just so happens that plot is never enough for me. And for a novel like this, like The Eighth Life, to work, I think I would need great characters. Now, because I'm reading The Eighth Life with someone else, I'm sticking to a schedule, albeit a rather flexible schedule at this point. And that is something that I sometimes do with big books, so it's another trick that I have, perhaps. Sometimes I would divide a big book into sections. Often the book would be divided into sections anyway. So what I do is decide how long I'm going to take with each section. Sort of, I'll do a section a week or 2 sections a week or whatever. That would depend on how big the sections are. And that's something I did recently with the Karamazov brothers. I own this edition by Oxford, translated by Iñad Avsay, which I read earlier this year, so I have already reviewed it. In case you're interested, I'm going to link to my review of this great Russian novel. And I think I'm going to follow a similar approach of dividing the book up and deciding how much I want to read with the rest of Anna Karenina, and also with War and Peace, also by Tolstoy, which I intend to read in the coming months. However, what do I do when books are either not already divided into sections or cannot be easily divided into sections? Well, I had to face that channel last year when I read the excellent yet baffling novel Duck's Newberry Port by the American writer Lucy Ellmann. With this one, I had to play it by ear. First, I had to get used to its style. In case you don't know, most of this novel is written in stream of consciousness. So most of the time, the reader is in the narrator's mind. And, well, that's a difficult place to be in because her mind is full of thoughts. Anything from politics to reality television to her family life. Also, the narrator gets distracted. She has intrusive thoughts, just like everyone really. Only that we are not used to that in literature. Although, well, it is true that, you know, the likes of Virginia Woolf and James Joyce explored similar narrative techniques in the 20th century, right? So it's not exactly something new, but it's something that a lot of readers are still not used to. The point is that it can be very challenging to read something like that, something that is narrated like that, but it is particularly challenging when the length is as big as it is here. This is really a chunker. And I must say that it works. I didn't want this novel to end, and now just by talking about it again, I almost feel like rereading it. Duck's Newberry Port is utterly amazing, but you need to know how to approach it. And I wish I could have read this novel in one sitting, but that is impossible. However, once I got into its rhythm, not only did I find it compelling, but I also developed an instinct for where I could stop reading, right? So I knew where I could stop and take a break from the text. Now, from memory, I can tell that I combined Duck's Newberry Port with other shorter books, but I can't remember which ones they were because I read this early last year, I think. Now, if my Goodreads is correct, and I checked it before starting filming this, but my Goodreads is not always correct because I don't always update it accurately, I'm sorry to say. I think I must have read Ducks in about 3 months. That suggests to me that I took considerable breaks and most likely read other books as I was making progress with this. Now, other big books that I read last year include Hopscotch by the Argentinian writer Julio Cortázar. There are 2 possible approaches to reading this novel that were set out by the author himself. And if you own a good edition of this novel, those 2 approaches should be included and explained in the introduction. Now, if they are not in the edition that you own, you can always Google what they are. You know, it's very easy to find out the 2 different approaches for this novel. Now, last year I took the most straightforward approach, which is the one where you read linearly up to a certain chapter and then stop. And because this novel is divided into chapters, it was extremely easy to do that and make more or less swift progress. Now, I have to say that I have not reviewed Hopscotch yet here on my channel because I haven't decided when to take the other approach, and I would only review it once I've read the whole novel with the two approaches. Now, the other approach is where you jump from different chapters. But when I do that, when I do the second approach, I'll review it for sure. You can count on that. Now, another great Latin American novel I have read but not yet reviewed here is The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño from Chile. What a great novel. I must say that this novel is so compelling that it really didn't feel like the big book it is. I was so engrossed by the story, the characters, the situations, the erotic elements, the violence. I don't know, everything that this masterpiece contains, that I didn't even feel like the book was big, really. It felt like a really short novel. I could have read it for a lot longer. It could have continued. And that is why, you know, passing on big books based on their length without giving them a chance will never make sense to me. But, you know, each to their own, I guess. However, you know, I was a little bit underwhelmed with or by the other famous big book by Bolaño, 2666 or 2666, which was published after his death. And I also read it last year. I must say that I had read The Savage Detectives once before, years ago, and 2666 was completely new to me. So I don't want to judge it yet. I would like to get some distance from The Savage Detectives and read 2666 again further down the line so I can make it justice. I don't think I could make it justice right now. So please don't get me wrong. I think this is an amazing novel, right? I just prefer The Savage Detectives right now because I've read it twice and I've read the other one in close succession. So, you know, take that with a pinch of salt. Anyway, I feel like this video is probably already quite long and I think I've said everything really I had to say about why I love big books and how I approach them, you know, as books, each book on its own merits, and I don't have an approach that works for all. But now I would love to hear from you, so let me know some of your favorite big books and how you approach reading them specifically. And if you don't like big books, if you don't like reading big books, also please let me know why. You know, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm curious. I want to hear from you. But I hope this video encourages you to read more and to read more big books. That's what I want to do with all the videos I do anyway, encourage people to read more. But let me know what you think. I hope that you are all doing well, and I hope to see you again for a book review or a video about books and reading. This is all from me. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.